Hello, and welcome to the Crowley ISD PLC Curriculum Preview for 7th grade ELAR Unit 2. I'm Sharon Graves, Secondary ELAR Curriculum Coordinator, and it's good to be back with you. I'm enjoying working with you during this school year. Please continue to communicate with me anytime for questions or when you need additional support. Our Unit 2 for this 6 weeks is Understanding Fiction and Drama. Please pause for a moment to review the Unit 2 Local Assessment Blueprint. 21 instructional days will be utilized from October 6th through November 4th. The local assessment will be available November 3rd for printing, and the unit should be assessed on November 5th. Teachers are to administer the unit assessment within 3 school days upon completion of their unit. For today's purposes, I will identify the curriculum hotspots and provide comprehension instructional strategies, which include the Notice and Note strategy, Anchor questions, and Fundamental 5 strategies. I will lead you through an analysis of the cognitive content and context of the Readiness Standard, provide seed questions for your PLC, complete the Content Builder and the PLC for the Reading PLC using Readiness Standard 7.6b and Figure 19D, and you will analyze the Readiness Standard in your IFD to gain a deeper understanding of how you can use this to focus on learning. The planning components and process of this video are the same as Unit 1 so that you can become familiar with the process. Materials that you will need are your Unit 2 IFD, your organizing instruction using the TEAC Standard Types document, and the PLC for the Reading PLC. For the second 6 weeks, the curriculum preview will target Readiness Standard 7.6b and Figure 19D. Students understand, make inferences, and draw conclusions, and analyze the development of plot through the internal and external responses of characters, including their motivations and conflicts. Based on the heat map displayed, what conclusions can you draw about 7.6b and Figure 19D? Please pause the video to discuss this with your team. Look at the question from the 2014 7th grade STAR that assesses Standard 7.6b and Figure 19D. 7.6 and Figure 19D were assessed together 4 times, and 7.6b was assessed 3 times in 2014. Please pause the video to discuss what level of specificity is this question and the alignment to the standard. Now that we've identified our hotspot for Unit 2, please locate 7.6 on page 24 of your IFD and 7.6b on page 26 of your IFD. Looking at Unit 2 in your IFD, find the Knowledge and Skills Statement 7.6 on page 24. Let's review the levels of specificity. There are 3 components to each TEAC and SE: cognitive, content, and context. For 7.6, students are asked to understand, make inferences, and draw conclusions. Notice the cognitive level of blooms in which students are asked to think. The structure and elements is the content, the what the students are learning, and fiction is the context, the how in which students practice and show their learning. When 7.6 is dual-coded with Figure 19D, students are required to make complex inferences and use evidence to support their answers. Please pause the video at this time to discuss 7.6. Now let's focus specifically on the hotspot, 7.6b. This standard is part of Category 2, Understanding Analysis of Literary Text. Please take a moment to pause the video to look on page 26 of your Unit 2 IFD and review the standard and unit level specificity. What is the verb and the cognitive level of blooms? What is the content, the what the students are learning? What's the context, the how in which students are practicing and showing their learning? Did you notice the Bloom's level of the verb analyze? The content is the plot development. and the context is through the internal and external responses of characters, including motivation and conflicts in fiction. Please recall our 4 essential questions which guide every PLC. What do we expect students to learn? How will we know they've learned it? How do we respond when they don't learn? And how do we enrich those students who are learning? We should first ask ourselves, what do we want our students to learn? Also, how are we making the learning relevant and rigorous for them? How will we know students have learned? This is what we look for in everyday instruction, the knowing. Do students know, and can they demonstrate their learning? As we use the content builder, let's build a plan for learning with this question in mind. To review from our last video, this diagram helps illustrate when planning for instruction, it's vital that concepts be taught in connection with the process standards. Students use process to acquire and demonstrate their learning. In 7th grade and 8th grade ELAR, Standard 19D is the tools to know process, and 19E is the ways to show. Provides an opportunity for students to demonstrate understanding and communicate an application of their learning. Please take a moment to review the placement of each TEK. Notice the TEK 7.6b has been tested alone, but also with Figure 19D. The supporting standard 7.6c is essential to providing the foundation for learning the readiness standard. Let's revisit question 2. During and after building a plan, using what we know about the process standards, we want to compose a response to this question. How will we know students learned? How will we gauge if students know and can demonstrate their learning to the depth and complexity of the standard? Please pause the video to discuss this with your team. Remember that the supporting standards are the scaffolds of learning. They're the prerequisite skills students may need to begin learning the standard or help them close the gaps. Please pause the video and discuss how you're already providing a support in your classroom. Question 4, how will we enrich those students who do learn? Discuss with your team, are you already differentiating content and processes according to students' reading levels? Do you know their readiness level? Do you differentiate the complexity of resources and tasks according to their ability? Do you provide them with deeper levels of reading with more in-depth purposes? As a collaborative team, are you aligning your understanding of the standard with the verb, the skill, and the context? Is your team agreeing on what students must be able to do to demonstrate mastery of the skill? Are you understanding the supporting standards? Are you checking for understanding through individual formative assessments to actually drive your instruction? Do you collect and review data to make your instructional decisions? And does your team use assessment data to make adjustments to your instructional plans? Your team should reflect on these questions continually. As in our first video, we will use the PLC for Reading PLC to plan student learning. The genre we will use is fiction for 7.6b. The text that I chose to model the instructional strategy is a short story. The levels of thinking I've identified is to establish a purpose, use background knowledge, summarize, make inferences, and use various types of questions. The evidence of learning will be using the Notice and Note graphic organizer and listening to student discussions. And the learning strategies are to use the close reading and cooperative learning structures. Although the Notice and Note strategies can be used with short stories, literary nonfiction, and poetry, 25 most commonly taught novels also contain the 6 common signposts of Notice and Note. The 6 signposts are contrast and contradictions, aha moments, again and again, tough questions, words of the wiser, and memory moment. Signposts emphasize the text structures that reveal the signposts and the questions that students should consider while they're reading. These are text-dependent questions where students make inferences about the text. The signposts represent what we want students to do as they read. They notice the clues to the signposts, and the anchor questions are the literary element to help them understand. As you teach each signpost, create an anchor chart like the ones on the screen for your classroom wall. These anchor charts will serve as a great anchor lesson and remind students to always notice and note. You should decide upon an order for teaching the signpost. Set aside time to teach each one. Teach each signpost with a text that illustrates the targeted signpost. Use a gradual release model and think about the generalizable language that's transferable so students carry that with them from text to text. The gradual release model works well with notice and note. You should explain the signpost and the anchor question. Tell students that you're going to show them how it works while you're reading a short text. Read it aloud to the first occurrence of the signpost, and then read the second section and then stop at the next instance to see if they can notice the signpost. Read the third and a fourth, gradually releasing responsibility to the students. Read to the end of the selection. Ask students to watch for the feature in their own independent reading, to mark these and write them down as they think about and reflect on the anchor question. These take time. This is a process. Also, be sure and use transferable language so students can see signposts in every text that they read. The notice and note strategies give students a scaffold so that they can read more closely and develop lifelong skills. They create skilled, observant, engaged, and independent readers, alert students to what's happening next in the text. They encourage students to naturally use text evidence and pay attention to specifics and encourage inferencing. Each signpost has several graphic organizers that students can use to show their evidence of learning. This is an example graphic organizer of contrast and contradictions. It serves as both a scaffold and a demonstration of learning. It has text clues that students look for to identify the signpost, as well as the anchor question to stimulate their thinking. All of these are in a PDF attachment underneath the video on the Center for Teaching and Learning website. Here's an example of student discussion during the reading of a story Tuesday of Another June. Students noticed the contrast and contradictions of June's close relationship with her mom, but June fails to tell her that she's being physically and emotionally abused by another girl. Another girl named June, actually, every Tuesday at swim practice. Students respond to the question, why is the character doing that? Later, students reflected and wrote about the most important signpost in the short story, answering each of the anchor questions, and they formulated theme statements for the text. The next day, students used their entries to begin writing a literary response to the selection, complete with a thesis statement, text evidence, and a life lesson learned. Thank You Ma'am by Langston Hughes is another short story to easily teach students contrast and contradictions and other signposts. Please also utilize the PDFs provided for more specific notice and note resources. Notice and note is a high-yield strategy which transfers learning, deepens thinking, and releases responsibility to the students when implemented well. Thank you for your attention today. For additional support or questions, please feel free to contact me. If you use any notice and note strategies or other strategies in your classroom that you'd like to spotlight, please let me know. Thank you so much.